Hi all. Let me go ahead and get, it looks like you have to enable screen sharing.
I have you as a co-host. I thought you could screen share. Let's see. There you go. That should do it. Did that work?
Not yet.
Okay, I'm going to. Okay, that should work. It wouldn't let me have too many co-hosts. Okay.
Okay. All right, go ahead and get started. So I'd like to start off by saying that this sort of thing is not really my cup of tea, but it has been a good exercise to sort of take stock of my life thus far and appreciate the people and the decisions that have brought me to this point. And also more and more as I get older, it's humbling to look back and appreciate how a lot of the really good parts of my life were made possible by the sacrifices of others. This has definitely become more true since the birth of my daughter, but it's also true in other aspects of my life. And so I'm grateful that I was asked to do this. And depending on how this goes, I might even be grateful that I said yes. So to sort of keep things moving, I decided to go over 4 sort of main sections of my life and sort of events that happened. So I'll talk about just my family life growing up, my experience at Berkeley, investigating the church and getting baptized, my partner David, and my daughter Rosie. And as I was sort of thinking through what and how much to share, this question, everyone can see my slides, right? I'm not just, okay, good. This was sort of the main question that I was trying to keep in mind, which is what foundational events or people in my life have established or strengthened my testimony. And I'll try and my best to stick to this. So family is the first thing I'm sort of talking about. This is a picture of me, my mom, Rachel, and my grandma, Rosa. And Rosa is actually my daughter's namesake, Rosalind. And I'll start by talking about my mom, Rachel. She's there. And this is a picture of my mom, Diane, who is my godmother, and me. One of the core values my mother instilled in me growing up was the importance of building community. In this photo, my godmother Diane, she actually lived with us for a few years when I was a kid. And it was while she was she had moved across country and was needing help getting back on her feet. And she just lived with us for like several years. And as a kid growing up, it was a really normal thing to have friends coming in and out of our house, staying for periods of time and going. My mom, like, as I was growing up, held like a lot of different jobs. But in our family, we always say that her true calling was collecting friends in need. And as a result, even though I was an only child, I grew up surrounded by a really like strong, wonderful community of like second parents who all, I think, collectively raised me. So my dad, Chris, he's the guy there. This is a picture of him in my grandpa Andy's garage. My grandpa Andy, his dad is on the right. My dad's always been like a fixer of things and sort of a perfectionist. My mom was always volunteering him to go fix things for the widows that lived on our block. And he always like, showed up, he did a really thorough job. He's also someone who like really values sincerity, and he's pretty derisive of hypocrisy. I think as I was investing in church and joining, a lot of his early concern with that decision had to do with sort of his wariness of institutionalized religions. I think he saw a lot of times that, you'd have a group of people who were claiming like a certain moral high ground, but then they were doing things that he viewed as discriminatory or just unfair. And his strong sense of rightness has been really a really important barometer for me. especially after I joined the church and was trying to like navigate a new belief system. So this is a picture of my parents when they were secretly dating in the mid 80s. You can tell by the wonderful clothes on my mom's perm. I think for a long time after I joined the church, my mom felt like I had joined because I was like missing something in my life that she hadn't been able to give me, like, and that I had sort of just said like I need something totally different, and I like was kind of renouncing my upbringing. But I think when I think about my life and how my parents raised me, my parents taught me a lot about what it meant and what it looked like to be like an actively good person, and what qualities I should value in other people. And I think in a lot of ways, it was that foundation that made me most receptive to the gospel principles of the church. They taught me charity and discernment and community, and those have been really powerful in shaping my decisions. So I went to college at Cal. This is a picture from my graduation day. You might notice Diane on the left. And then on the far right is my tia Lucha. And then the woman standing just to my right is Paula. Her name's Paula. Paula was a really close high school friend of my mom's. And growing up, I actually spent summers with Paula and her family in Mesa, Arizona. I know what you're thinking, who sends their kid to Mesa, Arizona in the summer? But it was actually really fun. She had 4 kids who were older than me. And I really loved hanging out with them and playing games with them. And, every summer I would come back and there'd be a new like husband or wife like that married in, and babies came every summer. And I really just enjoyed being with part of their clan. But the one thing I hadn't really loved about visiting them was having to go to the LDS church with them every Sunday. And I really didn't like going to the youth organization stuff. It was not a good experience. So flash forward, I'm in college. And when I was a junior, I took this class called an Introduction to Ethnographic Research. And it was part of my anthropology major. And the capstone project at the end of this class was to do this immersive research project. And the prompt was on a group of people or a subculture that you were unfamiliar with. So I sort of fudged it a little because I had experience with, this LDS family, but I don't know, when I got the prompt, like the first thing for some reason that came to my mind was that I was like, wonder what Mormons in Berkeley are like. So I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I approached my project with what I thought was like a really open mind. My first like sort of immersive experience was attending an Oakland State Conference. It was like the fall of 2020 or 2010, I mean. And one of the leaders who was up on the stands got up and proceeded to give this very, very sincere talk on the importance of welcoming all people into the fold. And he had spoke about the harm that had been done to many gay members of the community and of the work that really needed to be done to repair trust and reshape conversations that were being had away from this idea of tolerance towards like acceptance and love and healing. And this, when I was sitting in the audience, like this talk blew my mind. Like I realized, like, even though I had said I'm coming in with this open mind, that there was a lot that I was really holding on to about based on my experiences that I'd had with the Mormon church as a young woman. And that talk really like energized me. And I dove into my research project. I came to church every Sunday. I attended every activity that I was invited to. I met with the missionaries. I took all the lessons. And, for several months after I had finished my class and turned in my paper, I tried to not think about why I was still coming every Sunday. So I don't think I was like ready to really think about it too closely, but I had a turning point. It was April 2011, and it was a general conference talk given by Elder Uchtdorf. And in this talk, he was recounting the story of Saul, who was this antagonist of the church. And while Saul was walking on the road to Damascus, he had this vision of God, and it just like completely changed him. And this excerpt from his talk goes, there are some who feel that unless they have an experience similar to Saul's or Joseph Smith's, they cannot believe. They stand at the waters of baptism, but do not enter. They wait at the threshold of testimony, but cannot bring themselves to acknowledge the truth. Instead of taking small steps of faith on the path to discipleship, they want some dramatic event to compel them to believe. They spend their days waiting on the road to Damascus. And So this was pretty like formative for me. And I ended up, sort of making this decision about 4 months later. Like I was like, okay, it's time. And I decided that I need to get baptized. So this is a picture of me, and there's Paula again on my left, and that's her husband Roger on the right. I went to Mesa, Arizona to get baptized with their family, and it was a nice day. And I sort of want to, like, it might sound weird, but one of the things I had a really hard time with, actually, like while I was investigating, was trying to understand like the concept of faith. I remember this, like I had this really like fraught lesson with the sister missionaries where I was feeling like really frustrated that I didn't know what to do to show faith other than getting baptized. And at the time I wasn't ready. It wasn't the right time for me. And there was another member of the university where there, and I could tell she was like also frustrated. And I don't know if it was at me or I kind of think it might've been at the missionaries, who were very fixated on this one thing that they wanted me to do. But she sort of like threw out her arms in the middle of the lesson and was like, this is faith. She says, what you're doing right now here, showing up even though you aren't sure, coming to church even though you still have questions, this is faith. And that was Lainey. Everyone knows her. And so my baptism was really lovely, and it was life-changing in that it was this very distinct pivot point in my life. But it was also just one moment. And what Lainey said to me that day has come back again and again, as I've had questions and doubts and, anger, disappointment. I think in this church, it's really easy to feel like faith involves like big actions and bold statements, but I really have come to appreciate like the beauty of just faith in small actions. And so I also wanted to know, like when I decided to get baptized, I called my mom and I said, this is it. And she was like, okay. And, I've heard a lot of stories of families and parents not reacting well. I think especially with young people when you join the church, but I'm really grateful that I had parents who were able to support me despite their misgivings about it. And that's been really important for me as well. And while I felt, blessed to have parents that support me, I'm also really grateful that I happened to gain a pair of in-laws who are also very supportive in their own way, which brings me to my next big life section, and that's David. So I'll tell you about this picture and then I'll tell you about David. So before 2020 in the United States, if you wanted to get sealed in the temple, you had to get civilly married at the same time. So like it all was like had to be kind of wrapped up in one ceremony in the temple, or you could get civilly married, but then you had to wait 1 year before you could get sealed in the temple. And we both had decided that a sealing was important to us, but as the day got closer and closer, I knew that it was like equally important, if not more, that my parents were not disproportionately excluded. I mean, one, I'm their first child, I'm their only child. I'm a girl. I don't know. There's just all these things, and they're my parents, and they're super important to me. And I just couldn't picture being in a sealing room surrounded by David's family and not having them there. So we talked about it, and we ended up telling our parents that we wanted to just go in alone with just the two of us and two non-family witnesses. And David's parents, who I think had dreamed as much as my parents about seeing their first child get married, just very, very kindly and graciously agreed to wait outside with my parents. So when we went in together, it was a Wednesday afternoon. The temple workers were so excited because they don't get Wednesday afternoon brides that often, and they were super nice to me. And when it was all done, we walked outside to greet our families. Both of our parents and David's sister Marilyn brought me those flowers. She's on the right. And David's brother Toby didn't come up, but it was really great to see them all at once and to know that our parents had flown up together and had all this time to talk and try to get to know each other more. Also, it gave my parents a chance to ask David's parents questions about the sealing and what was happening, and it gave David's dad the opportunity to answer my dad's question. So, what does it look like inside the temple? To which David's dad replies, well, have you ever been inside a Ritz-Carlton? But it was a good day. So back to this guy. He's a very David is a very wonderful guy. He's a very talented musician, and he's a big music aficionado. He's really good with data and spreadsheets, and he's patient with everyone except our dog Blue. We were really lucky to start our relationship having a lot in common. Sometimes I look at him and I think I have no idea what you're talking about right now. And it's just like so wild to live with someone and have to negotiate two different minds. I think it's a really good daily lesson in pride and humility and loving thy enemy. But he's great. And being married to someone with such a strong and steady testimony has been a really significant part of, I think, my decision to stay in the church. Because even though he wasn't a part of my decision to join, he was around for a lot of my early years as a new member. And while I was just really trying to figure out my beliefs and my identity, and I think I've had an easier time of it. I've definitely, I think, been privileged not to experience any real like true hardships with the church. And I also, I think, have been lucky to coast off of his testimony when my own was really shaky. And so he's been a big part of my sort of middle times of my life so far. And in letting me figure out what I believe, what I think is important to me, and what actions I'm going to take when something bothers me. I think the main thing though that he's given me with this is enough time to gain perspective on what change looks like in the church. And in this church, change, I think, it can look like being the only voice standing up. It can be sort of holding your ground on an issue you think is right. But it also, I think, just is time. 10 years ago, I was deciding to get baptized, and I was grappling with this idea that someday my parents might not get to see me get married. And now that's just not a thing. It's changed. And I think for the better. So that's been like a hopeful faith building part of my testimony. So if my relationship with David has been sort of an important long-term part of my testimony, I'd say the experience of having our daughter has been a very like condensed and intense affirming testimony of the power of God and community. This is David and Rosie, as Rosie is a few hours old. So when our daughter Rosie was 5 days old, we were sitting at home, I think as you do with a 5-day-old baby. It was about 5 p.m. on a Wednesday. So for people whose lives were just going on, it was, peak rush hour. And we get a phone call from Rosie's pediatrician, and he says, Rosalind has screened positive for phenylketonuria. Don't Google it. He said, you need to get in the car right now and drive to Stanford Pediatric Hospital, go to the emergency room, ask for the on-call geneticist. They are waiting for you. So that was a pretty traumatic phone call. We got in the car right away as quickly as we could. I remember listening to David had like put on his iPod, and this song by like LCD Sound System called Oh Baby came on. And I'm like, I'm not joking. Like I'm sitting in this car, like I'm sitting in the back staring at my baby. And a verse from the song goes, oh baby, you're having a bad dream. You're in my arms. Oh sugar, you came to me. Could all be a bad thing and do you harm. So we made it to the hospital and started learning more about what we were dealing with. PKU is phenylketonuria. It's also called PKU. It's this really rare inherited metabolic disorder that only like 1 in 15,000 people have it, and only like 16,000 people in the entire United States. And what it does is it prevents your body from breaking down an amino acid and protein called phenylalanine. And when left untreated, phenylalanine builds up in the brain, and it causes this like irreversible brain damage. So the treatment that you have to start right away is this really restrictive low protein diet. So no meat, no dairy, no eggs, no whole grains, no nuts, no beans, no tofu, no peas, no corn products. So fruit and some vegetables. So the next few months were all about Rosie. We had regular blood draws, we had diet adjustments. We were just trying to learn like everything we could. And I told David I couldn't listen to music anymore because everything made me cry. So we were listening to really dumb comedy podcasts. And beside from that first phone call, though, what I want to bring back is I try not to think about that phone call too much, but there were two things that happened that night that have come back to me really regularly in a very like positive way. The first was when our hospital room was like filled with doctors and counselors and stuff. There was this counselor who had been standing in the corner pretty quiet, and she was just looking at me as I was like holding Rosie, and she came like leaned towards me and kind of touched my arm, and she really kindly said, "This is hard to imagine right now, but someday you're going to have a moment where you're just going to forget about all of this." And she was right. I think in a lot of ways, this diet, it's hard and it's pretty consuming. Everything needs to be weighed and measured and counted before she goes to bed. And David and I weren't really food people to begin with. So it's just been like an additional adjustment on top of that. But she was right. Like the days went by and moved forward, and we learned more. And, when we look at her and we play with her and we listen to her sing like Winnie the Pooh with extra vibrato, or she looks at me and says, "Silly old mama." It's like really joyful, and we don't think about PKU. And that's been a big blessing. And the second thing I remember clearly from that night was we had called a friend to come to our house as we were like sort of frantically leaving to take care of our dog. And hours later, as we were driving back in the night, I messaged her to ask if she was still there. And I said, "If you're not there, like, can you come back?" And she replied that she was still there. And I got home and I just like fell into her arms and I cried. And I was so grateful that she was there and that we weren't coming back alone. And the next few weeks, this really crazy mix of like love and joy and like really awful sadness and fear. But we like had so many people, friends that we knew because of our church community, that supported us in really critical ways. They couldn't fix what was happening and they couldn't promise that it would be okay, but they could feed us and be there for us and talk to us and give us space to sort of grieve and give me space to be selfish and angry and scared. And the whole experience just really crystallized, I think, one of my favorite quotes in the Bible is from Isaiah, and it goes, "O thou afflicted, tossed with tempest, and not comforted, behold, I will lay thy stones with fair colors and lay thy foundations with sapphires." There's just been so many people who have truly become anchor stones in the foundation of my faith. I feel really blessed by their fair colors and deeply aware of like the priceless value they have in my life and my family's life and the life of my daughter. And I think about that friend that stayed there that night and that counselor in the room, and those were each, I don't know, these like gemstones that have just been touch points in my life so far. And I'm really grateful to be on this journey with friends and loved ones. And that's my story. I just want to share some more pictures. My mom and our families, my dad, and Rosie. And yeah, thank you.
Taylor, thank you so much. That was amazing. I just really love to hear everyone's stories. We appreciate you being here. We're going to let Taylor go because today is Rosie's second birthday, and Taylor did this. We didn't know it was her daughter's birthday when she greeted us. So we really appreciate you being here and sharing your story. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Our next presenter will be Susan Comber. And let's get Susan. Okay, Susan, are you able to unmute yourself?
If it works, I think it does.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Hi.
Mandy, I just need to be able to share my screen.
That's right.
Getting the the screen set up.
Great. There we should be good to go.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I'm not as technically advanced, so I asked if I could get a little help with the pictures. Amy Fritz is going to be bringing a few up as I speak. And I have written it all down because I don't do well from notes. So let me begin. At the end of World War II, my folks settled in Walnut Creek in a little summer cottage on a hillside lot where they planned within a few years to build a bigger house. Wartime had made lumber scarce, so when their first child, my sister Nancy, was born, and Dad needed to add a room to the cottage, he used wood from a large piano crate, several actually, courtesy of Hendrick's Piano in downtown Walnut Creek. Then I came along and shared that tiny room with her. It's why I'm musical. I was born in a piano crate. My dad had a beautiful tenor voice, and Mom loved to sing along with them. They were really a wonderful musical influence, and I wonder if the piano crate was part of that too. They had a modest income, but they had good Depression-era budgeting skills, so within a few years they built that bigger house. And one thing they wanted to put in it was a piano. Music was so important to them that I remember this giant mahogany piano being delivered to our home. I was somewhere in first grade, and you see it in the background at the birthday party. I loved that piano, and it loved me back. Like Billy Joel in his song Baby Grand, my piano was a best friend. I went on to major in music at Cal, and I loved every facet of it. I took every course I could fit in. I didn't take my general requirements till my senior year. I was too busy taking music courses. And one delightful discovery was that among the music major companions, I felt I had found my people who thought and felt just like I did, and it was heaven. Having survived the Depression, my dad's mantra was, get an education. So I always knew I'd go to college, but I didn't ever imagine what would happen after that. I had long assumed I'd just finish college and be married shortly, like my sister had done. I had vague future thoughts, scenarios where maybe a few friends would come over and play chamber music or baking cookies on rainy days with my children, but I had no concrete career goals and no detailed plan of how to get there. With nothing definite on the horizon, in my senior year, I applied to grad school to give me a few more years to come up with a plan. As a grad student living in Oakland, to find a part-time job, I took out an ad in the local Piedmont and Montclair newspapers. It read, graduate music student seeks part-time position. I got 3 responses. One woman asked me to cook for her invalid mother. Another wanted me to clean her house in Piedmont. And the third woman who called was a choir director. She was at St. Margaret Mary Catholic Church in Oakland. She explained how she would play the organ while the singers gathered around up in the choir loft. She needed a section leading singer and was willing to pay. Did I sing alto? I replied, yes, in my best imitation of Marlene Dietrich, and I got the job. After a while, her husband was transferred. They moved, and because of my piano background, I became the director at St. Margaret Mary. I sort of fell into other music jobs as well, from accompanist for a theater company to teaching at Holy Names College. It's university now. It was smaller then. I was starting to get some career traction, but socially I lagged several years behind. I learned later that's very common among people with attention deficit disorder, for which I seem to be the poster child. By my late 20s, I was beginning to panic. There were no viable guys, LDS or otherwise, seemed to be on the horizon. But in the summer of 1977, there was a promising candidate in the music theory class I taught at Holy Names, Jack Pereira. He was charming. He taught music at Lowell High School and conducted the local Diablo Symphony in Walnut Creek. I kept writing my phone number on the chalkboard to remind students to call if they had any questions about the course. I always hoped he'd call. Until 2 weeks before the class ended, we had our first date. And then a few months later, we were married at the Institute building here in Berkeley. It seemed to me that he would, with enough exposure, naturally come to embrace the LDS faith. That was what had happened with my dad. But despite my prayers and efforts, it didn't happen with Jack. He respected my having church callings, and he would attend on special occasions, like when the children gave talks, go to ward parties, and he really liked our home teachers, but I usually attended church alone with the children. Jack had a chronic illness, which after a while impacted our finances. I needed to step up and contribute to the family. I was then teaching music part-time at local schools and some afternoon piano lessons at home. As a mom, that schedule worked really well for me. I didn't want to work 9 to 5 if I could avoid it. And I wanted to be there for my young son, and I needed to be able to assist Jack. What more could I do? This was a big issue, and I spent months anxiously searching and praying, but no answer came. I had hit a wall. It seemed I was following the steps and getting nowhere. Finally, I got on my knees and pleaded, I know I'm not worthy, but in your great mercy, Lord, please hear my prayer. I'm failing on my own here. Show me the way and I'll follow. I had at last become, like the prophet Nephi, willing to be led by the Spirit, not knowing beforehand the things which I should do. I think that's what the Lord was waiting for, because immediately I got a strong impression to buy the local newspaper and look in the want ads. The impression didn't stop there. I understood that in the want ads section under P, I would find a pianist job at the church. This was accompanied by a peaceful assurance that I had only to call the number and the job would be mine. And just like that, within a week, I was the new accompanist at St. Monica's Catholic Church in Moraga. I got to know a marvelous priest there, Father Brian Joyce. I held that post several years until the birth of my daughter. When I left St. Monica's, Father Brian insisted on keeping my name on a list of available wedding pianists that the many Catholic churches in the area would share with prospective brides. Unfortunately, the list was alphabetical. Because my last name, Pereira, started with a P, I rarely got called. Jack's illness worsened, and in 1997 he died. Although not unexpected, this was devastating. I took stock of my situation. I was in my 40s. My son was a freshman at BYU. My daughter was 12. I worked as a music teacher at Lafayette School, taught after-school piano lessons in my home. Social Security eventually provided some benefits, but after trying to live on these sources of income briefly, I saw I'd have to do more. As I had done in an earlier time of financial crisis, I considered many employment options. I studied scriptures. I prayed. I didn't know what direction to take. And so, again, I decided to turn it over to the Lord. I recalled a phrase from Paul's epistle to the Romans, "For ye know not what ye should pray for." And it became clear to me that I had to first pray to know what to pray for. I had to be careful, though, because in James chapter 4, verse 3, I found, "Ye ask, and ye receive not, because you ask amiss." Well, I didn't want to blow it. I didn't want to ask amiss. And I believed, as I had also read, that what to say will be given to us at the very moment we need it. So Heavenly Father knew my situation, and He knew the best solution. So this was my focus for the next several weeks. During that time, I received a phone call from a fellow teacher who told that the mother of a little student in my school had passed away and there would be a funeral. I didn't want to go to that funeral. Funeral still made me sad. I hardly knew the little girl. Yet an unseen hand on my shoulder pushed me out the door for the service a few days later. I drove to Hamlin Road in Lafayette towards St. Perpetua Church. A water main had broken and the street had flooded. Not knowing how deep the water was, I started down the road, but I panicked and I U-turned and headed back home. Within a minute, a strong impression came again that I had to attend that funeral. Though I whimpered that my car would drown, I turned around and started through the rising waters toward the church. A second time, afraid, I turned back. Again, the impression made it clear that I needed to be at that funeral. Well, I followed the direction and I arrived safely. Inside the church, I sat beside one of my teacher friends. As the service progressed, my colleague whispered, "How come you know all the prayers and responses from this Catholic service when you're a Mormon?" I began to reply that I used to, but as I was forming the words, I received my answer. I used to, and I would again. I had to come to the conclusion myself that I was needed as a church musician. At that moment, I got my answer of what to pray for. And boy, as it happened the first time with the buy the newspaper impression, this was unbelievably specific. I was to pray that Father Brian Joyce, whom I hadn't dealt with in years, but whom I would be seeing in a few weeks for one of those rare wedding jobs, would offer me a position playing at the 5 o'clock service Saturday evening at Christ the King Church in Pleasant Hill. Talk about specific. I knew nothing about Christ the King Church. I wasn't entirely sure they even had a 5 o'clock Saturday Mass. I didn't know that they had an opening for a pianist. Nonetheless, I prayed, doubting nothing. I thought of how some faithful members of the Catholic Church ask saints to intercede in prayer for them. Well, I thought I knew plenty of saints, too. And I asked a few LDS friends to pray along with me, that with an instrument in my hands, I could be an instrument in God's hands to help his children worship him. I continued with this focus for the next several weeks until the day that wedding arrived. An hour before the ceremony, I entered the empty church, unlocked the organ, and began to practice. 10 minutes later, Father Brian Joyce walked in and saw me. He called out, "Hi, Susan. It's been years. How have you been? What are you doing Saturdays?" Just like that. Sometime later, I told this story to Father Brian, and he smiled and said, "And you don't know how hard I was praying that you would say yes." Father Joyce's offer was generous, and I found playing piano for those church services richly rewarding on a spiritual level as well. I felt a powerful witness of God's love for me, and that he was pleased that I used my gift of music to connect his love to his wonderful children at Christ the King. With my finance secure, I looked ahead to my other concern. As rewarding as my marriage to Jack had been, there was an empty part to it, where I wasn't able to share my most precious faith. I realized how much of me was a product of that faith. I wanted to have a marriage relationship where I didn't have to edit my conversation about religion, where I could look forward to a marriage continuing. Several months after Jack's death, Katie, a violinist who had been in his high school orchestra, did a very kind thing. She reached out and asked if I'd like to play some chamber music with her. And so began our every other Wednesday afternoon sessions. We'd play Beethoven, and during breaks I'd tell her about my baby steps back into social life, hilarious dating stories. You had to have a sense of humor. I hadn't dated in so many years I was surprised by the new icebreaker, where guys used to ask, "What's your major?" or "Where do you work?" It seemed that now they were asking, "How many kids do you have?" which I think helped them calculate how much child support you must be getting, and was that greater than what they were paying out. As time went on, She mentioned a former classmate of hers from Lowell High, who was also a professional musician, a bass player, Steve Comber. His marriage had ended years before, and he was still single. Would I like to get to know him? She asked. Well, some recent dating experiences had not gone well, and I sometimes despaired that I would ever find the right person. Just about this time, I received an impression that I had been asking for the wrong thing. I shouldn't pray to find the right person. Rather, I should pray to be the right person. And maybe I was to be the right person for him. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was nice. Steve had an unusual working situation where he'd be in Walnut Creek on Thursday nights, our date night, and on Sundays. I recognized what a treasure he was, and I didn't want to lose him, but telling him that if you want to see me on Sundays, you have to go to 3 hours of my church was one of the scariest things I have ever done. Remarkably, he went to 3 hours of church every Sunday. He was welcomed by the high priest group and felt their genuine love. I knew just hoping the church would rub off on him wasn't enough. I prayed constantly. I gave him a set of Book of Mormon cassettes for his car. When he bought a new car, I gave him Book of Mormon CDs. When my son was married in 2001 in the San Diego temple, Steve came along with a family caravan. I had prayed that he would receive a confirmation the temple was the house of God, although he could not be inside. And he did receive a profound witness that day. Commuting and listening to the Book of Mormon bore fruit, as he did receive a testimony. And one evening he drove home and announced he had to tell me something. After listening to those tapes and being in church and being loved by the members, he felt he had to be baptized. Miracles continued. And within a few years, he and I were sealed at that same temple. And today, I still pray to be the right person. Through this journey, I have come to know deeply and intimately that I have a God of second chances and third chances with unfathomable love for me. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you so much, Susan. This has been just such a wonderful evening. I've just have enjoyed hearing from you and Taylor and sharing your stories. It just is just so incredible. And I just hope that everyone feels the same way. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here. We appreciate everyone who was able to join us tonight, and we look forward to doing this again. It's so great to get to know sisters of our stake. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Have a good rest of your evening. Bye.